Hello, my name is David Stevenson.
And my name is Paul Quattrocasas.
And together we're the founders of Future Food Finance. Every 2 weeks, Paul and myself get together and catch up to run through the kind of big stories over the last couple of weeks, particularly for investors both in the public and private markets in the food tech space. And then we like to deep dive into one particular subject. We're going to deep dive into kind of consumer behavior and consumer preferences. I'll start first, though, with a couple of stories that I think are really interesting over the last couple of weeks, more from the kind of public markets perspective. And I want to start. So we cover on this podcast everything in the spectrum of food tech, from kind of ag tech, kind of everything from, I don't know, robotic strawberry pickers, through food delivery, through to your kind of alternative proteins. So it's quite a wide spectrum we cover. And one of I've mentioned this before. One of the most interesting bit that's emerging in our spectrum is the whole carbon sequestration story, which is terrifically interesting. And up to now, it's been a bit blue skyish, if I'm honest. And what I mean by that is it's an idea which is effectively using farmers and the soil that they cultivate and husbandry for to sequestrate carbon dioxide emissions, and also to lower kind of nitrogen emissions from fertilizers is another kind of a regenerative agriculture idea. Now, a lot of this blue skies because you've got to measure it all. It's quite difficult. And up till now, there's not been a lot of government programs to actually put money behind it. But what I thought was really interesting is that even in Australia now, there's been a multi-billion-dollar program announced by the Australian government for carbon offsets, which sort of takes in carbon sequestration for farmers in Australia. So so if Australia, which has been a bit slow in some areas in all the kind of net zero stuff ambitions, if the Australian farming sector is getting behind kind of sequestering carbon dioxide emissions in the soil and doing carbon offsets, that's a really big deal because Australia is a very big food producing nation. And the other interesting story, which we keep coming back to, is, and I think we'll probably talk a bit about when we do my deep dive with Paul, is this whole debate about whether or not actually the alternative proteins, so that's another bit of the spectrum, whether or not they are brands on their own, so big well-known brands like Impossible or Beyond Meat, or whether or not they appear as ingredients in other people's food. So probably people are used to kind of corn-based or other soya-based substitutes being put in food. So in a sense, you're not a brand; you're effectively providing yourself wholesale, and that debate's definitely kicking off again now, because some of the big guys like Beyond Meat are now doing big brand advertising, and others are beginning to choose to go down the ingredient route or provide the technology that go down the ingredient route. So effectively, you might provide the IP. That debate's really warming up, and I suppose my last thing. The reason it's warming up is because the public markets are still in a very uncertain place. Our Future Food Finance Food Tech Index, which has basically been going live in its current form since December the 20th last year, still having a bit of a tough time. The markets are having a bit of a tough time at the moment. And if we're honest, some of the big names within our Food Tech Index having a bit of a bad time. So Beyond Meat didn't have good numbers and had a bit of a Wall Street reaction. So the thing we've been talking about for the last couple of podcasts, Paul and myself, it's still out there. There's still kind of public market discontent. But I think now what we're seeing is this is just a part of a wider kind of turn against growth stocks generally in tech stocks anyway, because a lot of tech stocks are having a very hard time. Anything backed at the moment by ARK and Cathy Woods is having a really tough time in the American markets. So those are the kind of things that I've picked up. Paul, any thoughts?
No. Well, yes, I have a lot of thoughts on it.
Lots.
Let me start with just one simple high-level comment about. I like to put things in perspective, as you know, David. Perspective for me is time frame, among many other things. Yep. And in traders or investors who are frequently making buy-sell decisions can, often without realizing it, get caught up in the moment, get caught up in the news, get caught up in the latest quarter. And that's a dangerous thing. And let me just try to shed some light on that with two quick examples, if I may. One of them, plant-based food. The other one, mobile phones. So Beyond Meat is a company you've mentioned, which went public in 2019. The share price today in 2022 is about the same level that it went public at. So if you had invested in Beyond Meat back in 2019, May I think it was the IPO, you'd be probably about flat. But what's interesting is that the revenue of Beyond Meat has increased by 5x. That's 5 times, not 20 or 30%, 5 times. The gross profit of Beyond Meat in that same time frame has increased 6 times. So if you are a value investor, if you're Warren Buffett believer, then you would say, hold on, price and value here are different things. Price is what you pay, value is what you get. So one argument is, and I'm not recommending necessarily Beyond Meat stock, I am suggesting that you could buy Beyond Meat stock today at the same price as 2.5, 3 years ago for a company that has delivered 6 times the gross profit on an annual basis as 2.5, 3 years ago. I think that is one of the ways to look at all of these opportunities is what has the price been over time? What is the price today? What's happened to the value in the meantime? The value based on revenue growth, gross profit, gross contribution percentage, and operating margins. And where is it likely to go? Which leads into our theme for today, which is what do we really think about, for example, plant-based food. I just want to give one other quick example of where else this has happened in time. In 1996, I think it was, 95, 96, maybe even before that, maybe it was 93, 94. Nokia was a Finnish company doing 5 or 6 different types of businesses, including timber, televisions. They just started making this thing called a mobile phone, and it was hot. It was hot in 1993, 94. It was so hot that Nokia started running out of cash for working capital reasons. The share price tanked, absolutely tanked. The market was spooked. It thought, well, Nokia just can't handle this new thing called a mobile phone. They can't make it quickly enough, and it's going to fail, or it's not going to make it. And I remember this well because I invested in Nokia shares when it really hit the bottom, the maximum pessimism, fear. And it was just a temporary issue. The underlying cause, and this is what we're talking about here with plant-based food and other food tech, the underlying cause, the force, the tidal force was incredibly powerful. And it was just a matter of time that the demand would correct the supply issues. And that's exactly what happened. We all know that Nokia went on to become the largest mobile phone manufacturer in the world with 40% market share and $50 billion market cap, et cetera, just based on mobile phones. So do I see the same thing happening with plant-based food? Absolutely. In the medium term, longer term, there's no doubt about it. And we can talk about that more if you'd like, for sure.
So, but let's go into our deep dive then. That's actually probably a good opportunity to sort of segue into our deep dive, which is, I mentioned, let's look at, classic Beyond Meat's a good way in, actually. We're not picking on Beyond Meat, but Beyond Meat is doing a twin strategy, which is it's doing kind of building its brand. So it's TV advertising in UK at the moment. But it's also supplying its products as a kind of wholesaler. McDonald's, the McPlanters, I think, is based on the Beyond Meat burger. And what that, I suppose, my question then is, who do we think these alternative protein providers are targeting? Are they targeting the kind of low-hanging fruit, which is the kind of vegans, vegetarians of the world, who've always been looking for an alternative to their burgers? I have my doubts about that, by the way. Or are they targeting the flexitarians? And if they're targeting the flexitarians, what's the behavioral perceptions that flexitarians want out of alternatives? Do they want something that looks exactly like meat, but maybe very processed? Or do you think that they want something that is different than meat, is healthier? There's no right or wrong answer. I don't know what the answer to any of these are. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are.
Well, yeah, David, I think the issue transcends that question. It's both and more. And what do I mean by that? Precision fermentation of food. This technology allows for the creation of any type of food, including hybrid formula between plant-based and cellular. When it comes to Beyond Meat, the way I would answer your question is around taste. I think taste is everything when it comes to food, as long as the price is more or less the same, and as long as it's not weird, as good or if not better, then why wouldn't every human being be interested in eating it as long as what's inside of it, or as long as what it's made of is good? And I want to give one example, and I can give an example of the Beyond Meat product. And this example is the chicken nugget, the plant-based chicken nugget that KFC has taken from Beyond Meat. It's not the standard Beyond Meat chicken nugget. KFC worked with Beyond Meat to create its own formulation. And I'm going to read a quote from the Daily Mail of a tasting. The Daily Mail is a newspaper in the UK. A tasting that the Daily Mail did of the KFC Beyond Meat plant-based chicken nugget. The quote is, "The nuggets taste delicious, exactly like real fried chicken, and have the look and texture of genuine white meat too. Heavily breaded, which was delicious, delightfully fake tasting." So to me, it comes down 80-20 rule, 80% on that, on the taste. And if the taste is that good, and over time people start to learn that when it comes to plant-based food, we're consuming less saturated fats, we are having lower cholesterol, we're lowering our cardiovascular risks, we're lowering GHG emissions, we're using less water, less land, we're helping the climate, then it becomes over time a no-brainer for everyone, every human, whether you're a meat eater or you're a vegan, doesn't matter. Whether you're an old person, a young person, doesn't matter. It tastes good, tastes as good as anything else. In fact, I think we'll find with the technology of these companies within 1 or 2 or 3 years, they're making food that tastes better than the food that they've eaten ever. And when it tastes that good and when it costs the same, we're not going to be calling it plant-based because there will only be plant-based.
I suppose that raises my question then, which is, I mean, you actually you hit the nail on the head there. You could make food that tastes better and is better for you, but the trade-off there is it's more processed. Yeah. So that's one of the issues I wanted to raise with you. So,
well, hold on. Is it?
Yeah.
Is it more processed? I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be more processed, because when you take chicken from the factory farms today of the chicken farms, and you take that chicken into the meat that ends up in a KFC actual chicken nugget, is that processed? I would say it is. I'd say it's probably processed a lot more than the ultimate, and I don't mean today's KFC plant-based nugget, but in 2 or 3 years from now, when it really does improve, I'd say that today's actual chicken nugget is a lot more processed than the plant-based one will be.
But by the way, I agree with you. I was slightly playing devil's advocate there. But I said that the other one on the processing one is that we could make food healthier. Yeah. That's already started happening outside the
sure.
In mainstream food, you've got a lot of omega-3 added to lots of foods at the moment.
Yeah.
And generally, I think we all like that. But there is this worry that it's kind of like by enhancing the flavor and enhancing the goodness, you are enhancing the processing. And I wonder about how because what I'm trying to get at is when I talk to vegans, and less so vegetarians, they all go, not going to touch this stuff because it's all processed. And I think, to your point, I don't think they touch any of the stuff which a lot of the food industry actually.
Well, on that, can I just jump in there? And they're right to a large degree. Beyond Meat burgers, there's a lot of bad stuff in them, right? I mean, I think most people are becoming aware of that, but it doesn't mean that's going to be the case if you're an investor next year, the year after, the year after. Again, investors speak longer term, not quarterly or weekly, monthly trading. So when we're looking at a company like Beyond Meat, which has attracted some of the best scientists in the world, some of the best executive talent in the world, which generally knows what it's doing, and there are going to be some bumps along the way. And we've had this initial hype in plant-based food from people who like to try it out. There's all kinds of consumers. Oh, I want to try out plant-based. So there's a plant-based burger. I'll try it out. Well, they try it and they're gone, and let them go. And they may or may not come back in 2 or 3 years. But what matters is, when is everybody going to join in 2 or 3 years' time? And I think when it comes to the ingredients, that's what's really exciting. Are all the ingredients players that are emerging out there. I mean, Motif Foods is an interesting one. And I read yesterday, I think they're having a legal spat now with Impossible Foods. And we're going to see more of that because it's about intellectual property. Intellectual property, it's just a tech industry. Intellectual property is technology, and it's going to become more important to the overall food industry, whether it's plant-based or cellular or vertical farming. And this is also what's super interesting about vertical farming and indoor farming is you can get truly pure food, pure leafy greens and vegetables, much more pure than organic food. And that's maybe a theme for another talk. But
and I agree with you on the ingredients, because I noticed, I literally last couple of weeks, both Givaudan, I never know how to pronounce them, Givaudan, and Novozymes, which both in their own way kind of do either enzymes or pure ingredients, are muscling aggressively into the kind of plant-based alternative space. And I suppose just like my last question, I suppose, is use of language. Yeah, is you talked about IP there. And of course, if you want the most IP, you're going to be down the tech end of the spectrum, which is less the plant-based stuff, which is about, to use a metaphor, it's about the cook getting the right ingredients and mixing them the right way.
Yeah.
A lot of the kind of cultured meat is down the kind of, the scientific end of the spectrum. They're trying to develop IP that can have real lasting value. And the language that gets used there is very interesting. So the Good Food Institute, which is very influential in this sector, likes using the term cultured meat, which they think is better than lab meat or faux meat. And the language does worry me, because language does matter, because actually a lot of the existing traditional food manufacturers are pushing back against the use of meat. For instance, they're saying you shouldn't use meat, or you should call it alternative cheese or milk. Yeah. So these rows are going on about language now. Yeah. And a lot of the kind of radical companies doing different stuff are trying to use this term cultured meat. And I can't help but think that's quite dangerous, actually. I'm not completely convinced cultured meat's the right term.
Well, you know what, David, I think it's all red herring. As an investor, I don't care, because I care about the underlying demand. If the product evolves to the point where it's so good that it cannot be denied, the customer wants it and asks for it, which is happening and will continue to happen, then the naming and the branding will take care of itself. I personally think, everybody's got an opinion on this. My view is within X number of years, we'll have an asterisk at the bottom of whatever the chicken nugget is, or the burger is, or the fish thing is. And the asterisk will be plant-based, or it'll be cell-based or lab or something, or there'll be some other name. The one thing the marketers are very good at is finding names and brands for this kind of thing over time. And there's no immediate rush to solve it, because cultured meat isn't even approved to be sold anywhere apart from Singapore. So that's a future, mini challenge for plant-based. So far, it hasn't really been a big problem or issue. In fact, it's probably been a good thing for the QSRs and restaurants and grocery stores and so on to say it is plant-based. But over time, again, I have this view, and it's hard to put a time frame on it, 2, 3, 5 years, that most food that we eat will be pure, whether it's leafy greens, vegetables, fruit, maybe vertical farmed, indoor farmed, or it's going to be plant-based, or it's going to be pure in terms of precision fermentation, cultured protein, meat. And therefore, all of these questions around nomenclature will be almost like we have today on the packaging of food, with the amount of fat, sugar, salt, and I forget the fourth nasty, and it's got a color code of red, orange, or green. And I think it'll be something similar like that. There'll be some color code to determine the source of the food, and it won't be a big deal.
Okay, I think we've run out of time. Thanks, Paul. That's it for this week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time. We hope you've enjoyed this episode and you've liked our quick bite of the food tech spectrum. You can now get this episode on Spotify, so just hunt us down, the Future Food Finance podcast on Spotify. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time, and until then, eat well
and sleep well.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.